Welcome in to the Bite Meat podcast, and this is one that we've been wanting to do for a long, long time, and it's one that we really haven't covered a whole lot, a little bit here and there, but not with an actual sensei, and that's something that not a lot of people can say. You know, they've had the Sausage Sensai on their podcast, Bill Dumas, Schultz's, and where else are you doing your wares now?
No, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm at Schultz Pit Room in Seguin, Texas. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I've been down here for about almost a year now. Prior, about 4 years, almost about 4.5 years rather, at
Mm-hmm.
Brotherton's Black Iron Barbecue in Pflugerville
Okay.
until John's untimely and unfortunate passing. But
Mm-hmm.
once he passed, I I moved down here to Schultz because, quite frankly, I live right around the corner in Wimberley.
Oh,
So,
nice.
so it works
Nice.
out pretty good. As bad as it was with John passing away and having to deal with all of that, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like the Kinky Friedman song from back in the day,
Oh boy.
the Kingster said, "When the Lord closes the door, He opens a little window." True.
That's right. Well, let's get into it a little bit because I know one thing I really enjoy following you on YouTube, all your social media, and as much as I fancy myself, I always call myself a dangerous pit master. I know more than your average pit master, but not enough to rank with you guys and all our great guests here on the Bite Me Meat podcast. I will say this before we get into it. Hopefully, everybody can subscribe to the Bite Meat podcast on wherever you get your podcasts, on iTunes, on Spotify. We always recommend Podbean because Podbean is where we host it, and you can get literally every single episode that we've ever done, and we've had some greats on here. But let's get into it. And I said I'm a dangerous pit master. Well, I'm a hot mess when it comes to making sausage, and I've gotten a lot better watching your stuff. And I know you have some classes, and I want to get to that later.
Yep.
But let's get to the story first, because anyone who is plugged into some of the things that you've done, some of the great recipes and mixes that you've done, they know that you have a passion for it. Let's just talk about reaching that height and what really kept you going.
Oh man, that's a long story.
That's all
I,
right.
I don't even know where to start. But
Mhm.
basically, the Cliff Notes version is I've been in the industry on both sides of the fence. We're talking in a proper USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, boys and
Mhm.
girls,
Yeah.
USDA commercial meat facility, as well as in the restaurant industry. So from the USDA side, I was working for Smoky Denmark Smoked Meats, wherein, under the governance of the federal government, we made all manner of smoked sausages and shipped them nationally.
Mhm.
So that's the commercial side of it. On the other side of the fence, I've been in the barbecue industry for a number of years. Beginning with Smoky Denmark, they had ran a food truck. At some point, I headed up the food truck and got some recognition there. And then from there, I went to Styles Switch Barbecue
Mhm.
in Austin with Lance Kirkpatrick, Shane Styles, Andy Stapp, and Alan Michael Jackson. That was back in the olden days of Styles Switch. Excuse me, I was there for about 4.5 years. And excuse me, allergies. And
That's all right.
we got a lot of good recognition via Texas Monthly during my tenure in 2017 Texas Monthly Top 50, and was with their organization, and we opened up the Switch out there in Dripping Springs. Uh, Somewhere betwixt all of that, one of my old customers, who
Mhm.
became a very dear friend of mine, rang my bell in December or so of 2019, and his name was John Brotherton.
Yeah.
And John Brotherton said, "Hey, would you like to come up here and make lots of sausage for our restaurants?" And I said I sure would, because I've been wanting to work for John for a long time.
Yeah.
And come about January 2020, we began in earnest developing all of the sausages for Brotherton's Black Iron, as well as the second restaurant that he had some say-so in, which was Liberty Barbecue, now
Mhm.
closed. January 2020, and then COVID happened,
Yeah.
and then caused a lot of heartache for a lot of people. And that's when a really good friend of mine came around, and his name is Mauro Cipari, also
Hmm.
known as Max, aka Texicana Barbecue. And
Okay.
Max is the barbecue worldwide barbecue consultant. So he travels all across the globe consulting on barbecue.
Mhm.
Fun fact: Max was part of the team at Franklin when they got the Beard nomination and award. Max is also one of the brisket cooks now at Interstellar. That's John Bates' organization.
Yeah.
So anyway, Max said, and he's heavy Italian, right? So he's got a very
Mhm.
thick Italian voice. He said, "Hey, Lily Bill, you maybe you're thinking about, no, making and doing sausage classes. What do you think?"
See that, and that's what people are going to love. When they plug into some of the posts and the channels that you have, your personality comes way through. I mean, it just always comes through. And one thing that is key here is it translates because clearly your personality is in the sausage that you make. And
Mhm.
and some of the creations that you make. Let's start there before we get into some of the parameters of how you make it, because I've seen, is it Christmas tamale sausage? I saw that. I've
Yeah.
seen some so obviously some with fruits and others. What are some of the creations that pop into that big brain of yours?
Well, you have to think of it from a couple different perspectives. One, from a chef's perspective, what do you have on hand versus what do you need to get rid of in the restaurant? So,
Sure.
in order to
Yeah.
maintain profitability, from there you kind of build up from there. But if you understand how sausage is made, sausage is an applied food science, which
Hmm.
operates on the same spectrum as that of artisanal baking. So there's laws and principles that apply because it is a temperature sensitive meat emulsion. Once you understand its construction and how it's retained throughout
Yeah.
its life cycle, then you can start breaking rules. So, that being said, right now I've got one that's about to come through tomorrow, actually,
Hmm.
and that is the fried catfish sausage.
Oh man. Oh,
So,
is this your first real production with this one?
Well, for this particular one, I've done things that were similar, like the
Hmm.
crawfish boil sausage, which had a similar concept. But this one, if you're familiar with Cajun cuisine, the base, right, the base unit, the base
Hmm.
emulsion, the base sausage is tasso,
Yeah.
the Cajun ham, which usually season red beans and rice, for example.
Yeah.
So that's the base.
Hmm.
Suspended inside that, so when you cut the sausage, you see it visually and texturally,
Hmm.
excuse me, is the fried catfish, the hush puppies, as well as some fried jalapeno strips.
Oh my goodness.
And it's over the top. So you get when you crack that link, you see it, you experience it both visually and texturally, and it tastes just like fried catfish, obviously. So
Unbelievable.
that's one that's coming full cycle tomorrow. And then
Hmm.
Mardi Gras is coming up, and I think we're going to do a king cake sausage. So I have a way to make sausage different colors. So the
Hmm.
king cake sausage is going to be the same color as LSU. So that, so that's what's going to happen there. And then we're going to make a muffaletta sandwich sausage, which is our nod to Central Grocery there in New Orleans. And
Yeah.
of course, it'll have every element of the muffaletta sandwich inside the link. The bread, the olive salad, the mortadella that we make in house, the Genoa salami that we make in house. It's
Hmm.
all up inside there. So basically, if you understand how things are constructed with a chef's mind and you know how the sausage is constructed scientifically, then you
Hmm.
can think of any composed recipe, no matter what it is, manipulate the ingredients, explode that dish, and put it back together in a tube.
That is amazing, and that's what our listeners are here for. And one thing I said earlier, when it comes to barbecue, I consider myself pretty good. Sausage, I'm a hot mess, and part of it is because I've had to learn a lot from you, but a lot from various outlets. I've always said this, and tell me if it's crazy. The closest thing to baking in barbecue is sausage making, because
Yeah.
everything has to be in grams, in weights, not in
Yeah.
like, well, how about a little of this and how about a little of that? Is that one of the things that you try to emphasize to people?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely correct because it is an applied food science. And being that it's an applied food science, weights and measurements count. And moreover, and more specifically, it's a temperature sensitive meat emulsion. That's what
Hmm.
it is. So, what we're trying to do is we are accurately going to construct a meat emulsion. You think to yourself, what is an emulsion? In ingredients in chef land and restaurant land, an emulsion is basically two differing ingredient items married together by force. And we're
Hmm.
talking 9 times out of 10 about proteins and salts. So, what some examples are of emulsions in the restaurant land? Béarnaise, hollandaise,
Hmm.
mayonnaise, those are all emulsions. So it takes temperature, that's ambient temperature and frictional temperature, along with proper weighted amounts of meats to fats to salts, just to be able to create the root base. But you also have to consider temperature throughout its entire life cycle, both at construction all the way to the customer's plate. Temperature matters. But you also have to think about the interface of different ingredients with the emulsion itself. So it
Hmm.
can be quite complicated. But, you know,
It can be
yeah.
complicated, but it's also just a matter of taking your time and sort of noting from one version to the next, isn't it? And that's what and well, actually, let's do it right now because I've teased it a couple of times, where people can say, "Hey, I want to learn from the Sausage Sensei some of the things that you do, so people can get into the details." Then we'll get into some of the broader things here on the podcast, like where are you going to be, how can people get a hold of you, etc.
Yeah, for sure. So basically speaking, all of my sausages use the same root base. Surprise! That fried catfish sausage, the jalapeno cheese sausage, the Central Texas hot gut, they use the same measured amounts of meats and fats and salts. That creates a root base, a root. What you apply to that root base, both primary and secondary ingredients, define the flavor outcome.
Hmm.
So as long as you know that, number one, and as long as you know number two, which is, as I described earlier, it is a meat emulsion, and you understand the principles and the laws to create that meat emulsion, it goes like this. It's linear, right?
Hmm.
Everything in life is linear, like hand in glove. So it's science. That's the why and the
Hmm.
what. It's science. It's a meat emulsion. The science dictates and creates a process. My process is 3 days to make one sausage or 3,000 pounds. It doesn't matter. It's
Hmm.
3 days. So science dictates and creates a process. The process defines and creates a root base, a defined root base, which is a measured amount of proteins to fats to salts.
Hmm.
That root base, 9 times out of 10, never changes.
Yeah.
So, what you apply to that, primary and secondary ingredients dictate flavor profiles. It's simple, but it's complicated at the same
Sure.
time.
Sure. What are the, you mentioned 3 days. Give us day one, day two, day three, what our people can learn from you.
Yeah, day one is when we take everything, all the proteins that I have, which are typically brisket trim, all right?
Hmm.
And we're leaning it out. We're getting rid of the external fat. That's intramuscular fat, not intra. So we're
Hmm.
getting rid of that external fat. We're leaning the protein out. And then we're doing the same thing with the fat. Sounds crazy, but we're leaning the fat out. So we're
Hmm.
getting that protein off the fat. So that way our weights and measurements are accurate, protein
Hmm.
versus fat. So we take the specific proteins and fats, and we create a measured amount of each. For example, a 70-30 ratio. We,
Hmm.
we apply the salts, that constitutes a cure. Okay. And that cure, the salts, nitrites, and normal salt, will react with the myoglobins and hemoglobins and create the cure. No, we're not talking about the band formed in the Midlands of England, fronted by Ron Robert Smith. Not that cure. So
Yeah.
that's day one. Day two is when we take everything from day one and we grind it, we bind it, we case it, we link it.
Hmm.
That's the long day. That's when we're actually physically making the sausage.
Hmm.
All right. Then it rests overnight and to condition the casings and to set the meat emulsion under proper temperature parameters, i.e., in the walk-in. And finally, on day 3 is when we smoke them if we got them.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
and it's a 3-day process like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, what about, the other thing that I think people may just make a mistake on is the heat and what you referenced heat a couple of times. What are some of the let's say the parameters there, and how wood can affect some of these sausages?
No, that doesn't have any bearing at all. And what
Okay.
has a bearing, what has a specific bearing on the creation and the retention of the sausage overall throughout its entire life cycle, from construction all the way to the customer's plate, is heat. And we're talking any type of heat. Heat is
Hmm.
relative.
Yeah.
So, but at construction, we're talking about the effects of ambient and frictional heat.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
When we're talking about the product hitting the pit, at any stage, anytime it hits the pit, we're talking about convectional heat and radiational heat,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So heat is relative somewhat, but heat is the enemy of the meat emulsion. So you have to keep things in proper temperature parameters, lest you break the bind, otherwise known as emulsion, and it will break. If you've ever broken a hollandaise or a béarnaise, then you know what I'm talking about. So that's what's most important. Weights and measurements are also important, because weights and measurements upon construction, the proteins and fat ratios and salt ratios must be accurate. There's no ifs, there's no ands, there's no buts.
Right.
Those are common mistakes. 9 times out of 10, when people make mistakes, it's because their weights and measurements are not correct, or they're not keeping things correct in respect to temperature parameters. Those are
Right.
common mistakes.
Now, once you mix whatever it is that you're going to be making the sausage, I think another common mistake, and maybe you can add some more as we're here, is the meat has to be pretty cold, and some of these things, then you have to take it to the refrigerator to rest it or whatever. Take us through that process.
Well, basically speaking, everything needs to be just hovering around freezing, 32
Yeah.
degrees Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
So the golden rule is keep it cold. If
Mm-hmm.
you work it, if it's got to stay cold, period. If you work it, meaning it comes out into ambient temperature and you handle it in any shape, form, or fashion, then you have to get it cold again. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to take your time with that. You can't rush it. You have to
Yeah.
have myopic focus and keep things within proper temperature parameters at
Mm-hmm.
every stage in the game. And we're talking about construction and retention under refrigerated uh, uh, processes. Now, the same thing applies when the product is getting ready to hit the customer's plate. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say you have the sausage and you're going to get it in the pit and out to the customer. So there's also proper temperature parameters there, because now it's quote unquote hot or going to be hot, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you don't want to break that meat emulsion. So you have to stay within proper temperature parameters in the pit to the customer. So that means oftentimes not exceeding an internal temperature of 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And also bearing in mind that your holding temperatures, and this is important in barbecue land, is that your holding time, rather, is very short. So the minute I get the sausage off of a smoker and then towards the cutting block, I've got about 2 hours before it dies, and it's
Mm-hmm.
no longer a viable product,
Yeah.
meaning it's ruined. So you have to think about that too. So in restaurant land, you have to
Mm-hmm.
think about your pars versus sales and how often you're going to turn the product. So the golden rule is to cook less more often. So that
Sure.
way you're keeping a lid on your inventory and not wasting product.
Yeah. Now, as we're listening to you, our listeners and myself, I'm sure they're like rubbing their head, going, "Oh my gosh, I could never do that. I could never." Well, they could never do what they could never do what you do. Well, I mean, very few people have that talent and that skill, and certainly the science behind it and all that. But I don't want to discourage people from
No,
making
no, not
sausage.
at
You know
all.
what I'm saying? So, like, I want to talk
No,
about that. Like it's not rocket science, but
no.
it's certainly not coloring with crayons. I mean, how would you explain for the backyard pit maker you can do this?
Well, you can do this. Actually, it's everything in life has rules, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
going to go if you're going to go catch tuna in Costa Rica, what are you probably going to do?
You go,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
Right? You're probably going to go offshore, probably about 50 miles out. You're probably going to set some teasers out, right? That's on
Mm-hmm.
each line, and
I was in Costa Rica this year. It's funny you said that, but go ahead.
you're probably gonna use the correct type of bait, weighted, probably with a circle hook. You're
Mm-hmm.
probably gonna drag that line, and you're probably gonna be looking for specific markers on the water. Let's just say if you see spinner dolphin, that's a good sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you
Mm-hmm.
see seabirds on the water, that's another good sign. So there's a lot of different parameters. Sausage making is no different. You just have to understand and know what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is, to your earlier point, it kind of is color by numbers. As
Mm-hmm.
long as you understand the laws and the principles, because everything in life has laws and principles. As long as you understand those principles and how they interact with one another, then
Mm-hmm.
you can create effectively. It's really nothing more than proper weights and measurements and temperature control. That's
Right.
it. It's
Yeah.
weights and measurements and temperature control and pumping the brakes, man. You
Yeah.
gotta you gotta be cool, man. You gotta be like the Fonz. You don't want to be like Ralph Malph or Epoxy.
Yeah,
So
exactly. See,
you gotta be cool, dude. So
now you're
and just
talking
take
my
your
language.
time.
Now you're talking my language. I think we're from the relatively the same generation, so we can all relate to that. But and it is. Some people call it artisanal sausage making. Some people call it craft. Here's the other thing that I think is the main reason I wanted to have you on. It's freaking great. I mean, there is a real difference. There is a real difference. Talk about like, okay, I can go to wherever HEB or something and get my sausage, and it's
Yeah.
good. But the difference between artisanal sausage and why it's worth the time.
Oh, 1,000%. Anytime, well, it's a sense of pride, first and foremost. Anytime you can construct something and do it very well with these two hands and this brain is
Mm-hmm.
always a good thing. That's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Secondly, the construction of sausage as it relates to Texas and specifically Central and South Texas relates to our cultural food history. Hello,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
meaning Bavarian, Bohemian, Spanish, and Mexican roots.
Mm-hmm.
All of those are very important to Central and South Texas. And and the influences are strong. And what we know as market style barbecue. And sausage plays a huge role in that, a huge role. So it's actually kind of respecting some of that cultural food history. And I'll go out on a limb and say this, that I bet you very soon that sausage is going to have its day in the sun. And we're not talking about just here in Texas, but we're talking about globally as
Mm-hmm.
well, because it's infinite. There's only, in my view, there's only so much that you can do with a primal or a subprimal. We're talking, in this case, a brisket, right?
Yeah.
A brisket is a brisket. And I'm going to tell you something, 9 times out of 10, you'd be hard pressed these days to tell this establishment's brisket from this establishment's brisket. I can't hardly do it. Daniel Vaughn could probably do it, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Vaughn, from
Yeah.
Texas Monthly. So I believe, and this is the reason why I kind of dedicated myself to this craft, that again, when you know the laws and the principles and the construction of the product, that it's infinite. The sausage is basically a medium,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like a canvas, if you will, and so the outcomes are limitless in respect of
Mm-hmm.
what you can do to it and with it, but it also harkens back, as I said before, to our cultural food history here in Central and South Texas. So it's very important to me.
Yeah, it is to me too. And you mentioned Daniel Vaughn. I would like to mention here real quick. He is going to be on this very podcast in 2 weeks. I tracked him down and got him on the podcast. I'm going to ask him about that exact thing that you just mentioned, and of course about all his travels and all that. But one thing
Sure.
that I know I want to talk to him about that applies to sausage making. You talk about a brisket is a brisket, right? And a chicken is a chicken, but in the barbecue industry in Texas and across the country and really around the world, people are really experimenting with different variations of spices. The international influence that is going
That's
around our country. Well, you can do that, in a sausage. Like, I mean, like, are you seeing that more?
1,000%, yes. I'm seeing things pop up, quite frankly, globally. There's some folks over in the UK with the you can find this guy on Instagram, SOSIG UK,
Mm-hmm.
Sausage UK. He's
Mm-hmm.
doing a great job. And then there's Dom, DOM, and Dom is with Big Don's barbecue down in Perth, Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Those two guys are great, as well as Steve Lind outside of Brisbane, Australia. He's doing great things with sausages as well. So the point is this is starting to take off, which kind of harkens back to what I said earlier. I think that sausage is about to have its day in the sun because it's infinite in respect to its differing flavor profiles, textures, and so on. So,
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah. So what, just out of curiosity here, you mentioned the catfish, etc. What's out there that's sort of percolating in your brain of like, you know what, maybe I can do this. And with respect to some of these international flavors that are really sort of infiltrating and coming into barbecue.
Dude, I've already done a bunch. I've already done a bunch of stuff, and in particular with differing collaborations with folks that have come from, quite frankly, all over the world. For example, when we had the collaboration with Winnie Yi Lakahani,
Mm-hmm.
that's the smoke queen out there in California. Man, we really harken back to her Chinese and Malaysian heritage. So the Sichuan beef noodle soup sausage
Oh,
was
wow.
was memorable because it had the numbing green Sichuan peppercorns, the wide wheat noodles, the braised beef tripe and beef tendon, has the proper bowl of Sichuan beef noodle soup, but in a sausage.
Mm-hmm.
That one was memorable. The ones that we did with Nyomata out of Monterrey, Nuevo Leon,
Mm-hmm.
the ones that we did with them, which one of the memorable ones was the Machito Cabrito.
Okay.
So that would be all of the offal from a baby kid goat inside that, a milk
Yeah.
fed baby goat. So, and then wrapped in the tripa and then flame grilled, which
Okay.
harkens back to a lot of the, it's traditional in
Oh,
Nuevo Leon.
I make cabrito all the time. Yeah.
So that was a good one, as well as the tres moles y mezcal, which
Mm-hmm.
was three moles from Oaxaca, along with mezcal, the pepitas, the queso Oaxaca,
Yeah.
all up in there. That one was great. Uh, Man, I don't know. Inspiration hits you where inspiration hits you. The only thing I can say to that is I don't consider the yes, it's food. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yes, sausage is food, right? It nourishes us, it keeps us alive, it fuels our engine. But I see this as art.
Mm-hmm.
Aha! This is consumable art. That means we are one.
Yeah.
But what is the purpose of art? What is the purpose of art?
It hits
Well,
people directly. You connect.
yes, but
Yeah.
Salvador Dali, the impressionist artist, said it perfectly. The purpose of art is to confront you directly and cause you to stop, pause, and consider, and perhaps challenge you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it. So, what I want to do, consequently, is I want to harken back to Salvador Dali himself, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to confront people directly. For
Yeah.
example, we have one on the menu right now that does that, and
Mm-hmm.
that is the Girl Scout cookie sausage.
Good Lord.
That's right, boys and girls.
Good Lord.
That's right. So that is a 100% beef-based sausage infused with Mexican dark chocolate, chiles ancho, and guajillo to balance that out. A whole lot of brown sugar. The Girl Scout cookies, the Samoas, and the Thin Mints are inside the sausage, not crumbled up on top, not served on the inside, inside the sausage. So what you have here is sweet and savory with the texture element from the Girl Scout cookies itself. It's perfectly well balanced. I'm gonna blow your mind with that one. And the peach cobbler sausage, when we make it in the height of summertime, does quite frankly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I like doing that. My favorite sausages, quite frankly, are going to run with what I call dessert sausages.
Oh yeah.
peach cobbler sausage, the Girl Scout cookie sausage, and so on, where you get that sweet and savory note, but you also confront people directly as well. And that's
Hmm.
what I like to do. When I hit someone and I say, "Hey, try this Girl Scout cookie sausage," and I see the look on their face,
Yeah,
they're
like
like,
what? Wait a
I
minute.
mean, but when they try it and they go, "Oh my God, it makes
Yeah.
sense. What just happened?" Then I know I've done my job.
Yeah. Now you were obviously, well known in the industry and popular demand. You're always in demand and such. Um, how do you go about like just having the discipline to actually, you gotta sell this sausage too, as opposed to just being the mad scientist type thing, you know? Yeah.
Well, you have to be fearless. There's no fear. That's what you have to do. In life itself, there should be no fear. And I
Hmm.
have a motto with that. I'm going to live two lives to everybody else's one, right? So that means that I have no fear. And yes, you're correct. I do need to sell it. So some of these more challenging sausages that may be a little bit, you know, complex for most people. I had to make a smaller amount perhaps for the restaurant, but in a festival circuit, game on. I
Yeah.
can move a lot of it. For example, uh, Meat Stock Australia will be doing some really crazy things in Sydney for Meat Stock, and I've got some things planned. And that Meat Stock, I think it's like what what did they say? What's the attendance of that? Throughout 3 days, I think they said it's going to be like 224,000 people across 3 days.
Wow.
So that's the largest barbecue and grilling festival in the Southern Hemisphere. It's quite something. So
Yeah.
when I get into a festival setting like that, or be it a Texas Monthly, then I know I can make things that are a little bit more complex and challenge people. And they don't have any place to escape or run to. They're mine.
Hmm.
So
Right.
and I can move that product and
Yeah.
watch their brains implode.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
also has to make sense, right?
Hmm.
It's not making quote unquote weirdo sausage just for the sake of making quote unquote weirdo sausage. It's not about that. What it's about it's consumable art, as I told you before, but it also challenges me, and it sharpens my skills to make sure it makes sense within the unit so it stays intact throughout its life cycle.
Hmm.
But it revolves around that artistic wheel. And that's just what floats my boat. I just like things that are complex like that. When we're talking about music, I love things that are complex. We're
Hmm.
talking like Frank Zappa, for example, or maybe King Crimson. We're talking about complex shit. So
Yeah.
that's what floats my boat.
All right, so a couple more minutes here, but I want to get our listeners to understand and learn how they can learn from you. You have classes, you have
Yeah,
YouTube videos.
yeah,
How can people say, "All right, I'm in"? Now, maybe they just start with a classic, pork and beef sausage, and
yeah.
and they go from there. But they want to learn it the right way, from the casing being just right to well, I should say from mixing all the way to the casing being just right and cooking. How can people get a hold of you, where you're going to be, etc.?
Oh, that's so easy, man. It's so easy. All you got to go is get on the interwebs and sausagesensei.com.
Yeah,
Bing.
yeah.
So I have my website, and it's one stop shop. It's intuitive. So you can go on sausagesensei.com. You can see my tour schedule, where I'm going to be, as
Hmm.
well as sign up for sausage classes, which are bing, bang, boom, plug and play.
How
Sign
often do
up
you
for
do
a
those?
class, and then off you go, sir.
How often do you do the classes?
I do sausage classes every Saturday here now at Schultz,
Mm.
unless I'm on the road.
Yeah.
Unless I'm on the road. So right now I'm booked pretty solid. I have a lot of road dates, but it's every Saturday unless I'm on the road here.
Hmm.
Now I have a lot of road dates, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So road dates in March, I have two sausage classes in Perth, Australia in March.
Hmm.
And then we spend a week in Singapore. And then we come back, and then we have sausage classes that are we're in the final stages. I think I'm safe to say that we have sausage classes across the Australian continent. So we're going to start in Brisbane, And then we have Meat Stock Sydney. That's the big festival. And then we have Sydney itself. And then we have Melbourne. And then we have Adelaide. And
Hmm.
then we have Auckland. And then we have Christchurch, New Zealand proper. For you West Coast folks in the LA area or
Hmm.
anywhere in the West Coast, my business partner on the West Coast is none other than Harry Sue, aka Slap Yo Daddy Barbecue.
Hmm.
So I conduct sausage classes with Harry Sue roughly once a quarter. So the
Okay.
next sausage class in LA will be June the 15th in Diamond Bar, California with Harry Sue. And then we have another sausage class overseas, and that will be basically in the Midlands, in the Birmingham, uh, Midlands area of the UK, and that's
Okay.
with Rodeo's Barbecue over there. So, and then of course every Saturday here when I'm not on the road.
Man, that is absolutely fantastic. I would highly encourage people to get out there. You are truly the best, and I just really appreciate you joining us. We've had some great ones on here. Oh, one more thing. I'm going to be doing the Houston Houston Rodeo Cook-Off,
Yeah,
and doing some podcast stuff there, and talking
yeah.
to some of my friends that are competing. They don't even have a sausage category.
Well, they should.
I
I don't know.
know.
I don't know why they don't.
They
I,
have the three main ones, of course: chicken, sausage, ribs, and all that. I mean, brisket ribs, but they don't have sausage. It's crazy.
no, they don't. But I
Mhm.
heard that which one was it? The American Royal. I think they did it this past year, if memory's not mistaken. I think it was the American Royal. But we'll see what happens. I don't know. Well, yeah.
Well, the world is changing. The barbecue world is changing, as we talked about. So hopefully it'll work out. Listen, man, really appreciate you taking some time from making that
Absolutely.
sausage. Highly encourage people to go and get with one of your classes, and really appreciate it, man.
No, thank you. I appreciate your time and I appreciate the listeners' time because, I'm the, I try to be humble and I try to stay grounded. So thank you for reaching out and thank you for everybody listening. So there you
All
go.
right. Coming up next is the smoking hot tip of the week, and we'll get to that right now. All right, man, we are off.